But a huge part of this is just doing this self-inventory and going, okay, well, first of all, is this a problem? So often everybody else in the person's life says it's a huge problem, and the person says no.
Welcome to Alternative Health. I'm your host, Karina Rachel, and I'm joined today by Dr. Colin Ross. Our topic today is strategies for substance abuse. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So substance abuse is a very common problem. What strategies should people know about that can maybe help them with substance abuse issues?
Well, substance abuse, like you said, is very common. It's in the range of 10 to 15% of the population will have a clear-cut, definite substance abuse problem at some point in their lives. And it's costing the economy a fortune. It's tied into lots of violent crime. So it's a huge problem, criminal, financial, brain health, behavioral, relationships, all across the board. And it's really basically the same strategies, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or what type of drug it is. In terms of managing the withdrawal state, from a doctor's point of view, it's a different set of drugs that you use for heroin withdrawal compared to alcohol withdrawal, compared to cocaine withdrawal. So from a doctor's perspective, managing withdrawal, you have to understand the differences. Mm-hmm. But from the self-help recovery or from the AA, NA, or the therapy recovery perspective, it's kind of the same general strategies no matter what the substance is. Mm-hmm. And that's also true if we expand addictions to include eating disorders, self-mutilation, gambling, sex addiction. So the first thing, I've got two mottos in my therapy model that I use all the time. One is the problem is not the problem. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind that is, applies to substance abuse, whatever the presenting problem is, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, eating disorder, 90+% of the time, but not 100% of the time, the presenting problem is actually the solution to some problem in the background. Mm. So if somebody is addicted to cutting themselves on the wrist, almost all the time, what they describe is it's like shooting heroin. You got all these bad feelings, bad situation, conflicts, stuff you don't want to deal with. It builds up. You try this, you try that, you try this, you try that, and nothing is working. You get out the razor blade, you cut. It's like IV heroin. The feelings are gone literally almost instantaneously. Instead, we're kind of calm, kind of floating, kind of euphoric. Everything feels okay. Now you have a sense of power, control, hopefulness. Life is tolerable. Everything's okay. So therefore, the cutting is incredibly self-reinforcing because it actually works for a little while. And then all the situation comes back, feelings come back, and you're back on the treadmill, and then you got to repeat the addiction. Mm-hmm. And so with cutting, most likely, obviously you cut, there's going to be pain signals going up to your brain. If you have pain signals going to your brain's going to release endorphins, which are going to interact with the same receptor that heroin interacts with. So you're probably literally activating the same receptor and getting the same effect as shooting heroin. So the first thing about all these different kinds of addictions and drugs and alcohol is you got to take a step back and realize, okay, wait a minute here. I'm using the drugs, I'm using the alcohol for a reason. Mm-hmm. It's solving a problem. What's the underlying problem here? Which could have started in your childhood, your teen years, your adulthood. It's going to be some bad feelings, bad relationships, bad situations, bad picture of the future. And that's too much. I don't want to deal with that, so I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. By focusing on the sex addiction, focusing on the eating disorder, or being stoned, wasted, or even passed out. So in order to solve the problem of the substance, you have to figure out, well, what's the function of the substance abuse? Mm-hmm. What is it helping me to avoid? What are the underlying problems? Right. Then you have to come up with a plan for addressing all of that.
So it's kind of a coping mechanism.
Yeah, basically.
And you want to try and nail down what it is that we're trying to cope with.
Right. And then next step is, okay, what am I going to do to cope with all of that in a healthier way? so then I can eventually let go of the drugs and alcohol. So that's the problem is not the problem. And then the other motto is just say no to drugs. And by that I mean, there really is no tips, no strategies, no recommendations. There's no procedure. Nobody can teach you. You're just going to get serious about recovery or not. And the only way to get serious about recovery is you got to dig down inside there and decide. Now, that doesn't mean I decided I'm good to go. That means I've decided to begin getting serious about recovery. Then we can get to, okay, what do you do from there? But a huge part of this is just doing this self-inventory and going, okay, well, first of all, is this a problem? So often everybody else in the person's life says it's a huge problem, and the person says no. So at some point, you got to give yourself a wake-up call, which often can be not until big disasters have happened, like a whole series of DWIs or losing jobs, losing relationships, being in the hospital with liver failure. And it's amazing the level of denial that people can have. I mean, it's absolutely astounding. To me, that's just a measure of the desperation to avoid whatever the pain is that's being avoided. So, but as I said, there's really not a formula, a method, a technique, a strategy. You either are going to get serious about it or you're not. And so you just have to do this internal self-inventory and decide, is this a serious problem? And am I going to get serious about a change here? And if you're not, there's no outside person who's going to be able to do anything because you're not going to be motivated. You're going to be in denial. And then the outside people just have to decide, okay, well, what am I going to do about this person? Am I going to let them be in my life? I'm going to stand by and watch them self-destruct, or am I going to set some limits, or what am I going to do?
Right.
So another part of the problem, which is not really the individual person, is there's a gigantic investment in the business of drugs and alcohol, obviously. So beer companies, whiskey companies, wine companies, it's perfectly legitimate business, but clearly they're also making a lot of money off of alcoholism, just like casinos are making money off of gambling addicts. And then we turn to illegal drugs, it's just the same thing. It's a huge business financial incentive. And so in the big picture, to tackle the problem of substance abuse in America, we have to do something realistic about the business aspect of it.
Right.
And then that gets us into legalization of drugs and all of that side of things. But there's going to be a lot of people who don't recover because there's too many people pushing too many drugs at them too hard, and they just don't have the capacity to say no. Right. Or once you're far enough into the cycle where you're actually physically addicted, then the addiction can just kind of roll on its own and run itself. And if you're like a serious addicted heroin addict, you never come down. You never even come close to what the underlying problems are. Right. So then you actually have a physical addiction problem, and that has to be taken care of medically before you can even start to look at the underlying problems. Right. And then if you've been using crack enough, you actually can destroy your brain. So now you do have a biological disease in your brain caused by this substance abuse. So that's a big difference. Having a biological disease that starts you using substances, that's one idea, which I don't really buy. But there's no question that, I mean, if you're literally 2 days away from dying of alcoholism, there's zero possibility that you're going to get into recovery. It's just too late.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people go that far down that path. But if you're not that far down that path, the number one thing is you got to make this inventory. Take a cold, hard look at your life. Is it working? What's the price you're paying? And is it time to get serious about getting sober? And then if you get serious about getting sober, okay, well, what do I need to do now? Well, if it's alcohol, going to AA is a good idea. Having supports in your life. Not having all your friends be the guys at the bar. So one of the reasons it's hard to say no to alcohol is often people have only drinking buddies. Right. And if they say no to alcohol, they lose all of their friends. So you can't just jump from all drinking friends to no friends, because that's just going to make you go back to the bar to hang out with your friends.
Right.
So part of the recovery process is building healthier relationships, other activities, just for distractions, just for time fillers, but also so you got something to live for. That's a positive motivator that's going to give you the get up and go to do the work of recovery.
Right.
So you got to work on building a healthier life all across the board, because you don't have a healthy life with alcohol. Take away the alcohol, now you got a healthy life. That's not the way it works. Usually there's a whole unhealthy life foundation with alcohol sitting on top of it. Take away the alcohol, now we got to look at the whole foundation of your life, which is a big project. And it's not just do this, do this, do this.
Right.
But the basic ideas are, you got to take a look at all your relationships, your relationship with yourself, in the AA model, relationship with a higher power, reassess all of this and see where you can borrow energy from and motivation from to get you going in the process.
Right. And I think that, where we kind of started the conversation out talking about, that oftentimes the substance or the self-mutilation or whatever it is, all these different things, eating disorders, it's a coping mechanism for the underlying problem. And what you're saying is that once the addiction goes on long enough, well, now you have two problems, the underlying problem and the physical dependence and the physical effects that the drug has had on you.
Exactly.
And so I think that's a great idea, building the support system, having other people in your life that are going to help you in this recovery, in this journey that you're going through, rather than trying to go it alone.
And then, as we've mentioned in some of the other videos, there's just general life health all across the board. And so with alcohol, I remember when I was a medical student and intern, we would see people who had big, serious alcohol problems, their liver enzymes are up, and we would give them specific vitamins IV automatically, because they're just in case they're low, and then we would check and see that they actually are low. But even before we got the blood test results back, we would start them on some thiamine, some multivitamins, because people who drink heavily don't have very good diets, and their livers often aren't working very well.
Right.
So there's a whole clean up your entire body part of the project too.
Right.
Which means sleep, diet, exercise, all the things that are important in life. And those all can contribute to the actual recovery from the substance abuse.
Right.
Because the stronger your foundation in all areas of your life, all areas of your body, the better.
And then perhaps something like cognitive therapy, which we also discussed in a previous video, that kind of goes along with that. So you're addressing the physical and that underlying initial problem that made the person start turning to the substance in the first place.
Right. And I'm big on cognitive therapy, but I don't want to make it out like that's the one and only solution to everything. Clearly, having a religious community, a secular community, relationship support. I remember when I lived up in the Canadian Arctic, we called everybody Eskimos back then. Now we have to say Inuits, which is fine. So an Inuit guy who had been heavy drinking alcoholic, Pentecostal guy came into town and converted him to Pentecostalism, been sober for 10 years. I mean, instantly converted from horrendously bad alcohol problem to sober, and sustained it for many years. So whatever works and whatever helps is good.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think we covered a lot of ground here. Are there any other closing resources or references that you'd like to direct people to?
Well, I think all the A's, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, those are all really good free support systems, which aren't really a match for everybody, but are very helpful for many people.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Ross.
Yeah, thank you.
And I want to thank you so much for watching. I do look forward to seeing your feedback below and letting me know your thoughts and maybe questions after hearing our discussion today. I hope you'll subscribe to the Psyche Truth channel and come back and join me again next time. Thank you so much for watching. Have a beautiful day.